Allow me to ruin your Christmas. It's more than a suggestion. Actually, it's not a suggestion during this episode of Your Mic. It's the name of my third novel, which I published independently back in 2022. Now, what does my third novel have to do with your journey as a podcast host? Well, everything. Now for some context. I had written the book Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas as a way of hashing out some feelings. Some would probably say anger management issues after reading the book, which is now an audiobook in the form of a podcast. Just search Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas on your favorite podcast app and boom, you can listen to it for free. So it was really, I would say, more along the lines of dancing with my shadow while also lampooning the stereotypical Hallmark Channel happy ending movie trope. Plug in a different geography, plug in a different kind of character, but the plot is always the same. The guy gets the girl, and it's a happy ending, and everyone lives happily ever after. Blah, 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 blah. So I had fun doing the exact opposite, and the result was a pretty fun thrill ride that got a little grim and gruesome and dark at times. Now back to the writing process. It was fun. However, the editing part, the part that came after the actual creativity, that's where your podcast journey comes into play. So if you were to treat the perfectly imperfect manuscript as you would your podcast journey, you would know that you're going to get kicked in the teeth quite often. Me getting kicked in the teeth would actually be my editor quite literally dying suddenly over the course of a weekend. And it was horrible. Somebody died. A wife lost her husband. But wait, the plot twists even further. Because if that's not enough, his partner, who's now tasked with editing all the books under their publishing house's name, is locked out of his machine. Not a password in sight, including my book. So guess who had to start all over when it came to editing Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas? He did. And so me trying to be the empathetic guy was like, hey, this is really horrible, and I don't feel right with you having to start all over, knowing how much it meant, how much your business partner meant to you, and this is all just a loss. He was one of your closest friends, and I just don't feel right doing this. And that's in addition to it being a lot of work having to start all over because there are all these other projects that they're working on as a publishing house, an indie publishing house. And so this was me trying to lighten the load. And the answer I got was, well, we still need to push forward with a fall 2022 release date. Otherwise, it's going to mess up the system with Amazon. And I don't know what I don't know. And of course, I didn't know that there was a process, that it was going to get messed up and it would have ruined their back end, whatever. And so I was thinking to myself, and of course I was right in hindsight, that this was not going to go well, and it didn't. The book was published with a few typographical errors, and after doing some podcast guest appearances, I had learned that typically a few errors is acceptable in the indie publishing space. And I will say, as a reader of both indie and traditionally published books, I've actually read some books that were traditionally published where there were more than just a handful of grammatical mistakes. It happens. We are perfectly imperfect people. So, how does this relate to your creator journey as a podcast host? Well, you've got to prepare to be shocked and surprised when things literally go off the rails over the course of a weekend, and when you think that things could not get worse, there's another plot twist. And then there's another plot twist. And then there's another and another, so on and so forth. Listen, at the end of the day, somebody died. That somebody was my editor for the third novel, Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas. And not only did his business partner have to start all over again, the book was put out with a few errors. We could not delay the release. And then, because life is full of twists and turns, in 2023, I was dropped from the publishing house due to poor sales. More twists and turns? How about literally 2 people showing up to a book signing? How about more than $1,000 in ads run and no more than 50 books sold? So really the lesson here is, are you doing it because you're expecting an actual monetizable ROI? Are you doing it for fun? I was a little bit of both. I wrote that book, out of the 3, I wrote that book as like the one where I had the most fun writing. And I think it was because I, by that time, knew what it took to structure a novel and create characters and write in a first-person POV. I knew how to write in a way that would dazzle certain readers who were into that kind of a twisted plot. And so it was fun. It was less trying to figure out stuff and more about me ruining people's lives, which is a very twisted thing to say. But when you're an author, when you're a writer of fiction, that's literally what you do. How can I torture people? Now, when it comes to your podcast journey, you definitely do not want to torture people. The process itself can torture you, which is why I'm having this episode and this conversation with you one-on-one, is because the podcast journey, like an author journey, like a business owner journey, like an entrepreneurial journey, will no doubt kick you in the teeth over and over and over again. And when you fall down, sand is going to get kicked in your face. And then after you get your teeth kicked in, you fall down and you get that sand kicked in your face, you're going to get punched in the stomach. And then someone's going to stomp on your kneecap. And then you're going to get up and you think you're going to be okay. And there's blood and sand all in your face and it's grimy and blended in together. And then you're on your 2 feet, but barely. What happens after that? What happens? You get clotheslined and you're back on the ground once again. It's not easy. Growing a podcast audience, like writing a novel, like building a business, is far from easy. It can be simple. It could be systematized. It could be monetized. Never is it going to be easy, and the struggle is always, always guaranteed, even when you have something systematized, operationalized. There's always going to be something that will go awry, a botched recording, a battery dying out, and then realizing, oh, crap, I don't have a spare battery. When you run out of memory on a card, when the internet goes out at your office or in your home studio, and you have zero control over that. When you're supposed to be recording and it's the only day of the month where you can get into the studio to record, and what happens? You get sick and you lose your voice. No control over that. Our journey as creators, whether we're podcasters who are also business owners and entrepreneurs, or if we're podcasters and authors, or what have you, is always going to be full of twists and turns and things that go wrong and things that don't go as planned. How we bounce back says more about our journey and who we are than our best piece of work. At least that's what I think. And I stand by my work. I'm just throwing it out there that maybe, just maybe, when things do not go well and things are messed up, that how we get back up and how we adapt, how we overcome, really tells the story of who we are and what we do and the meaning behind it. So this Christmas, this New Year's, I wish you all the best. And in 2026, I am rooting for you. And I hope that whatever got in your head, whatever was living rent-free in your mind in 2025 will be laid to rest in the upcoming year. Really appreciate you listening. And if you have found this story, the story of Allow Me to Ruin Your Christmas, if you found it useful or insightful, please feel free to share with the podcast host in your life. Until then, keep your mic hot.